Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Prior to the 10th and final plague, Makat Bechorot, the death of the firstborn, the Israelites are commanded to finally take an active role. Each and every one of the 9 previous plagues did not impact or affect the Israelites at all in any way. They sat back and watched. While the Egyptians bathed in blood, the Israelites drank fresh water. While pests attacked Egyptian crops, the Israelites reaped their harvests. While it was so dark that the Egyptians could not even get up from where they were, the Israelites' homes were illuminated. Here, though, prior to the death of the firstborn, the Israelites are told they had to act. They're told to slaughter the Paschal sacrifice and v'lachu min hadam v'natnu al shtei hamezuzot v'al hamishkaf, to take some of the blood of the Paschal sacrifice, put it on the doorpost and the lintel of their homes. We've come to understand this to mean that the blood will serve as a siman, a sign, to prevent Hamashchit, the destroyer, from entering the Israelites' homes, to save us from that fatal final plague. Ibn Ezra of Spain, one of the most distinguished biblical commentators of the Middle Ages, clarifies, though, that each home actually had 2 gates, an outer gate and an inner gate. If the splattering of the blood on the doorpost was for all, including the angel of death, to see, then the blood would have been placed on the outer gates, but it wasn't. He explains that the blood was placed on the inner gates, in secret, where nobody could see. He goes on to say that the blood was only for the Israelites themselves to see. Ramban Nachmanides, the 13th century biblical commentator from Catalonia, clarifies that the Torah says the Israelites should not go out of their homes that night. Yes, this is to protect them from this destroyer that would cause the 10th plague to happen. But it also further cements the idea that the blood was then not placed outside of their homes. If they're told to not go outside their homes and put blood on their doorposts, then he understands that the blood was spread on that internal surface, that internal entrance. In theory, an omniscient God could still see it no matter where it is, but no matter where it is, the Israelites would still sit in their homes that night and just stare in silence at that blood. During Wednesday's inauguration ceremony of President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, both Senator Amy Klobuchar, in her opening remarks as chair of the Presidential Inaugural Committee, and President Biden himself made note of the fact that the inauguration was taking place at the same location that only 2 weeks earlier witnessed a violent and bloody insurrection. They both referenced President Lincoln's decision to make sure that the construction of the Capitol continued during the Civil War. And in quoting him, they said, "If people see the Capitol going on, it is a sign that we intend the Union shall go on." And so, in some ways, it was essential that the inauguration ceremonies happen outside the Capitol, no matter the reduced size of the pandemic, because of the pandemic. You see, Biden was not worried about having a press secretary declare it was the largest inauguration in history, because he actually wanted to make sure it was the smallest because of the pandemic. But he also wanted to make sure that it happened in that place where only 2 weeks earlier, blood was shed, glass was shattered, marble was cracked and tarnished. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow remarked during the inauguration ceremony that their cameras were still able to see remains of graffiti, bigoted tagging that they were unsuccessful in removing and scrubbing away off the marble rotunda. But to stare at that graffiti and the democratically elected president taking the oath of office in the same frame, in the same shot, it's as if we're seeing one as a catalyst to remind those who became apathetic or complacent, a catalyst to those who refuse to believe what we have been fearing for many years about the importance of working to sustain and support a democracy and the democratic ideals that it's at the core of this experiment that we call America. It shouldn't have taken a violent insurrection to get to this moment. It shouldn't have taken bloodshed. It shouldn't have taken a violent mob. It shouldn't have taken an act of domestic terrorism to remind us how fragile our democracy is. As podcaster, co-host of Pod Save America, John Lovett said when he was interviewed by Stephen Colbert on The Late Show this week, if something comes out of these last 4 years, it can be that we finally are completely honest about how broken things have gotten. What made the Israelites take that active role in the 10th plague? Some commentators suggest that the reason there were 10 plagues was not for Pharaoh or the Egyptians, but for the Israelites. They needed to actively participate to get to the point to realize that they were finally ready to march to freedom. They stared at that blood on their doorposts throughout the night, on that inner entry. And as Ibn Ezra said, it wasn't for others to see, it was for them to see. That blood was a symbol not just of a paschal sacrifice, but a symbol of what would become of them if they did not leave tyrannical rule behind. And it was that blood that caused them and the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude of individuals who were complacent up until that point and rose up as well, caused them to rise up and leave the narrowness of Egypt and the narrow-mindedness of Pharaoh, caused them to cross a split sea to explore a wilderness that was wide open with possibilities. So even as the shattered windows are replaced and the cracked marble is repaired, even as the wood is sanded and the columns are buffed, as the graffiti continues to be scrubbed away, let us not forget that on the same site that a violent attempt to destroy democracy took place, the transfer of power happens. Democracy was maintained. On the same site where bigotry and hate stormed the US Capitol, the first woman and woman of color took the oath of office to serve as vice president of these United States. That the same man, US Capitol Police Officer Eugene Goodman, who stopped this violent mob from entering the Senate chambers and potentially hurting, harming, and killing members of the Senate, escorted Vice President Kamala Harris to the podium to take her oath of office. The insurrection is a reminder of the work we need to continue to do to make sure that democracy survives, but to witness democracy in action, to witness that inauguration ceremony, is, to paraphrase Lincoln, we see the inauguration ceremonies at the Capitol going on, and it is a sign that we intend this country, this experiment called America, to go on as well. The highlight of the inauguration, no doubt, was the words of poetry, which are more like words of prayer, modern day liturgy, a modern day prophecy from Amanda Gorman, the 22-year-old National Youth Poet Laureate, the youngest ever to deliver words of poetry at the inauguration. The words that she shared, she wrote after the act of sedition that took place on those Capitol steps, that very place where she delivered them 2 weeks later. She said, and I cannot do it justice like she did. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us and what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true, that even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory will lie in the blade, but in the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare. It's because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delay in democracy, and this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. Let us constantly be reminded of the blood that is splattered on our doorposts that was the catalyst for the Israelites to march from slavery to freedom. And let us constantly be reminded of the blood that was shed that was a reckoning for our country to protect democracy at all costs. And with that bloody reminder, may conspiracy theories and violent insurrections, may elected officials casting doubt on election integrity, may politicians pandering to white supremacists also pass over us as a nation, for they have no place in this place we call America. May we remember and mourn that insurrection, but ultimately, just as Miriam will do next Shabbat, will sing out when the Israelites finally crossed that split sea. And she said, Shiru l'Adonai ki ga'o ga'ah. Sing unto God, for we have overcome. May this past Wednesday's inauguration ultimately be an opportunity to celebrate that we have overcome, that democracy continues. For while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. Shabbat Shalom.